tonight. We don't have a microphone, so I'll have to do my booming voice. The topic of water is on everyone's mind at the moment, and it's not going away. And basically we've got to increase our understanding, I guess, of what's happening with our water so we can make better decisions. So I'm not sure which hat I'm wearing tonight, but as a councillor, we need to immerse ourselves in the detail. So I'm not an expert in water or anything else really. I'm a commentator, if anything, or maybe a practitioner, but I'm certainly deferring to all the expertise that I've drawn on over the last, well, maybe 20 years at least. So I've managed to work with a broad range of scientists from all over the world, and so I'm informed by these people. And as the disclaimer says there, that they're not necessarily the views of other people or agencies. So everyone has a different view towards water and landscape management. So that's a given, and I guess that'll always be the case. So Bathurst has 15,000 water meters, people that buy water from council, and the less water people buy, the less income council gets. So we've already got a dilemma. So we can't build more infrastructure because our income's going down because we're selling less water because we're restricting people from using water. So that's a paradox already. But we're quite happy with that. If we can stretch our water supply out as long as possible, we'll probably last a lot longer than other cities at the moment. The cities west of the divide, as you all know, are suffering badly. Tamworth's water supply is, well, Tamworth anyway, it's down to 6%, no, it's down to 1%. Burrendong's down to 6%. The Oberon Dam is probably slightly better off than Ben Chifley. Ben Chifley is stable at about 44% at the moment. Oberon Dam's maybe about 48. City's water supply is getting down towards 50. So they've got a desalinator that they've just enabled. So Sydney's got that advantage of having a desalinator, which probably could supply 20% of Sydney's water if it's going flat out. But there's problems with that. It draws out a huge amount of energy. And it actually causes pollution. When you put heavily saline water back into the ocean, it creates dead spots in the ocean. So on that goes. So there's a whole bunch of community people that we're engaging, and including the irrigators and the industry. So without water, industry slows down, jobs are threatened. So we've got all these economic problems with lack of water. So the idea is to move forward. The council will have a level 4 to 5 on October 14th, and that will be severe. That'll be different to what we've ever imagined in Bathurst. It'll be like handheld hose twice a week for half an hour or something for your garden. So all sports ovals have to die, or they go back to absolute minimum, So Bacaddy Park will be exempt. There's a few other places that will be exempt. But yeah, we've got a whole management plan ready to go. The council has. But that's Ben Chifley Dam as we see it since 2002. So you can see, if you look at May, probably can't see May, but every May, June, July, August, about now it kicks up. They're the kick-ups in winter. So you can see over the other side there, that's our winter kick-up, that little blip there. So we haven't had our traditional winter kick-up. So that's a problem. So this is our, and you can see the kick happening there again. So last year, 2018, 2016, the kick went nuts. And we had a wet year, we had floods. But those floods vaporised. We didn't capture enough water in the landscape, and that's what I want to talk about tonight, how not just putting it into the dam where it evaporates, but capturing it in the landscape. So that's where we are, 2019, so we're still tracking along there. We're flatlining there. And the predictions aren't good for higher than average rainfall. The Windmerdale Dam is east of here, about 10 k's in a straight line. It was built by Gordon, or built by the Public Works for Gordon Edgell's canning factory. He wanted pure, clean water, which comes out of the national park up there. It's a pristine site, and as Steve would know, but just about every endangered or threatened species is probably within a kilometre of that dam in the region. So it's a biodiversity hotspot. It's a gene pool, and there's native fish in there that don't occur anywhere else. So it's an amazing place for biodiversity, and it's shut off from the public. But it's about 1/17 of Ben Chifley. So if we drew down on that, it'd only keep us in water for a few weeks. So it's not a viable. It's a great backup, but at the moment we just use it for parks and gardens, and it's not used for drinking water. But if we have to, we can divert them. That's really our last resort, is having that backup dam. It's about 80%. It's pretty full most of the time. That photo was taken about a week ago, so it's pretty full. And we do have the means to put the pipeline into our water filtration plant, so we can use that water. So the Windmerdale rivulet, this is the Windmerdale rivulet. So this is in January. There was a storm in the catchment in the Windmerdale rivulet, and it just came down like, these events have only started in 2000, since 2000. So there's massive surges come down the creek. And that, so that took out, as you can see, all the fences, and it brought an enormous amount of nutrients. So that's all our sheep dung, our mulch. So these were spot storms, 80mm spot storms in 2 catchments, created that and that got down to my place. It was about 1 kilometre or 2 down from there, and when it got to my place, it was 5 metres deep, and so I took everything out, fencing, but by the morning, it was back down to 1 metre deep. So this is a 5-hour peak, massive peak, massive damage, and again, there's all the farmers' fertility in that storm. There's the photos of the up at Peel. So that flood came across all the, I don't know if you can orientate yourself, but that's looking, the far one's looking west, this one's looking north. And you can see it came across all the creek flats. And it added a bit of topsoil to all those creek flats, but then it took it out from somewhere else. So that's predicted by the climate scientists. We'll get short, sharp storms, and the challenge is now, it's an engineering challenge more than anything, is to capture those storms. Is to capture the storms up in the catchment, slow them down, and get them to soak in to the landscape, so we can slow release the water, so trickle instead of a massive flood like that peak storm, and again they're likely to get worse and worse. We've got to look at how we can buffer the creek banks and the floodplains to cope with these massive spot storms, if you like. And we can talk about the reason for those later. But so that's a government in Murray-Darling Basin Authority. This was published in the Land newspaper a couple of weeks ago. So as I said in council the other week, it's not the Green Left Weekly, it's the Land newspaper. It's the National Party. It's the National Party Bible, and this is the stuff they're seeing, that this is climate, and that's what climate change looks like. So in 2000, it suddenly went off the cliff by 40% in the Murray-Darling system, and that's reflected in Bathurst, and I can see it out at my place at Peel. So my experience is really a whole bunch of stories. It's about, you know, what I've seen over 45 years of having a little block of land on the Windmerdale rivulet. So that's informed me really well, and so that's my reference point. So when I see what's happening in the Windmandale, it's happening everywhere else. This is just a brief. Oops. How do I get that to play?
Water, the sort of element of life, really, and it is the transport system that everything uses, you know, between the interiors of a cell, it actually does the transporting, and it does the transporting through the whole landscape. So it's the production line of every living thing, and if we didn't have water to move things around and to facilitate those processes, then the process wouldn't be.
We probably take it for granted, probably less so, you know, with the drought, but I mean, water just drives everything we do in human society, but also to what drives ecosystems. I mean, every ecosystem in the world.
It's in much shorter supply in terrestrial systems than we understand, and the way that water has operated for millennia has been changed quite dramatically by the way that we as humans impact the earth.
Where is water? It's everywhere that living processes are able to operate, and without it they just can't operate. So everything within the natural system is trying to manage water. Grass creates clay layers which absorbs water, cells organic material, and one of the very important things you can see, these have got water sitting on them. But that will happen every day, and the environment, each of these plants is an air conditioner, which if it can keep it cool enough, brings back the moisture it used in the daytime. So it's that recycling system, not only of the raw materials of production, but the water recycling is what runs the whole landscape. And the water is moved, of course, by gravity, and for water to get into the clouds and be rain, it's powered by the sun. So when we go back to the really simple things, we've got the sun evaporating water to the clouds and gravity shifting it from there on.
So Peter Andrews, is, everyone I think on this slide has spoken here at Rahamim, except for a couple of overseas people. But I'm sort of limiting referencing these slides to people who've got to Bathurst and they've spoken here or they've spoken at school set or somewhere else, and so there is a local reference to all this. So obviously, McTaggart and David Goldie are locals. So the Peter talked there briefly about the heat, the sun heating up water vapour and sending it upwards. The idea is to put water through plants, and that's what we're sort of saying there. It's the rainfall decreases by 10 or 15%. Runoff could decrease by 25 to 30%. So that's just apparently the way it is, I'm told. So we will get less runoff if we get less rainfall, and that's how we're trending at the moment. But I still think at some point we will get big storms, and our average rainfall might come back up to what it has been traditionally, but it'll come in big storms, and it'll come. So what Walter Yarde, you remember Walter? Yes. Walter's now touring America, and he's really got deeply into nuclei and mist. So how a forest will put out bacteria and microparticles, which will form raindrops will form onto those microparticles, and that's how you get rain on a forest. Whereas out in the desert, you just got dust, and those particles are far too big to be a nuclei to form a raindrop. So Walter went on to stardom once he left here, and he's touring America and getting quoted in everyone's books now at the moment. So. But what Walter said here, and we've said that lots of times, at the moment we've got 50 out of every raindrops, out of 100 are lost. And we need to get that down to, 25 raindrops to run off in the first instance. If we get them to soak in the landscape, they will eventually flow through the landscape, but we're just trying to slow the whole process down. So Judith Swartz is saying there, we have to recycle water through vegetation, not evaporation. So as the solar energy picks up, the heat picks it up, it goes up into the atmosphere, and then it releases the heat to space. So that's how we cool the planet, is putting solar energy back into space with water vapour. So water vapour has been called a greenhouse gas, and these days it acts like a greenhouse gas because it's changing the climate. So the amount of water vapour in the atmosphere in terms of all the water on the planet is infinitesimal. It's tiny, it's 0.003 or something. It's hardly any water is actually of the Earth's water. The bulk of it's in the ice caps. Well, obviously salt water is in the oceans, but the bulk of our fresh water is in the ice caps, and there's only a few percent available to humans at any point in time. So Peter Andrews he's just saying we've lost all our green cover by overstocking over the last 200 years, and that has changed the climate. So there's climate scientists and Walter and those people saying, oh well, it's actually clearing has caused the problem. Well, I don't really care what's caused the problem, whether it's burning coal or clearing land and clearing forests. The fact is that solutions are the same. The problem caused different ways. So let's say it's half and half. But what happened was when Walter started saying that, the oil companies in America latched onto it and said, oh, it's not fossil fuels, it's clearing, and blamed the people clearing land, which was the Heartland Institute in America notorious for that. And they've got all these wacky scientists that write papers for them, and they're it's not me, is it? So the scientists employed by the petrochemical companies are essentially the 3% we hear about, that are the dissident scientists. And again, I see most of that channeling through the Heartland Institute through Exxon Oil. So yeah, there is a thriving industry. If you put your hand up as a scientist and say, I don't believe climate science, you'll get money. As Judith Swartz said, we actually hardly know what we don't know about what's coming and how the weather systems work. We talked about the large water cycle, the small water cycles, or the micro water cycles. They've all been disrupted. The micro water cycle is what Peter talked about earlier. It's about the dew going onto that plant, trickling down and watering that plant. So the rainfall in Bathurst is 600 mil a year, wish it was, and the evaporation rate is 1200. So somehow the rest of that water must be coming somewhere. So it's coming out of the atmosphere and it's condensing, especially in winter when you can walk under a tree and see the frost melting and you get actually a little rain shower at sunrise. You get water coming out of the tree. So that's happening on a scale we don't even see. So if you've got greenery and forest and plants and plant ground cover, you will get water because it'll condense on that, because that plant's 90% water, and it's cooler. So it's like when your beer glass gets water on the outside because it's cold and it's in warm air. So Charlie Massey was here last year at Skillset, and he talks about increasing soil carbon. And soil carbon increase or drawdown is about using plants to put more mulch into the soil and build more carbon. So there's a lot of different sorts of carbon. I won't go into all that, but there's green carbon and black carbon. Black carbon is coal, I guess, but, or char, or a number of other things. But green carbon there's a 2 to 3 ratio. So if you want a tonne of carbon, black carbon, you need 2 tonnes of black carbon, you need 3 tonnes of green carbon. There's a lot of innovation going on in that area. My cousin up at Malangani has got a a char burning system. He's got a gas generator. He powers his factory with a syngas generator. He generates gas out of biomass. He's got compost. He's putting char into plant matter. He's putting it into cattle and stock feed, and that reduces the methane. So there's a whole relationship with char and digestion systems and getting it back into the ground. So we can't get carbon through plants or grass effectively without animals. So obviously kangaroos and bearongs and little things like that did all that before 200 years ago. So now we've only got cattle and sheep to do it. So we're stuck with them. We do have kangaroos, of course, but they're not farmed. So we've got all this land cleared, we've got all this grass, so you have to keep animals in the system to keep the process going, the manure, the carbon, the plant growth, and grass has to be trimmed. Basically, it's the way it works, but not too much, not down to the ground, which we've been doing in the past. Bruce Pascoe was here in 2016. He talked to me about how he, from settlers' diaries and observations and him doing his PhD in Gizawarajiri, he looked at ancient water management by Aboriginal people, and he could see contour lines and tillage, and where they cleared creek flats through burning, they were growing grain crops and they were drying the grain and putting it into silos. So they had yam farms on contour. So they were growing vegetables, producing grain, baking bread, doing all the stuff we do, but they were doing it their own way. So I didn't learn that at school. That was all new to me, that they're doing this stuff. And because it was terra nullius, it wasn't anyone here, so they weren't doing anything, were they? Patrice Newell, who's been to Bathurst a few times, she just wrote a book called Who's Mowing the Farm, and it's an interesting read about having a big farm in a really hot climate up at Scone. But she's looking at soil. She went to South America and looked at the Petra Terra, the way the Amazonians made soils by slow burning. So burning without oxygen concentrates the carbon and it concentrates the nutrients. So if you burn it, you lose it, but if you burn it like a smouldering heap when you pile your leaves up and smoulder it, you're actually producing a really good fertiliser product. So expert tree planters will burn biomass in the hole for the tree or in the garden and use that, put manure and straw on top of that, but that will be the mineral concentrate they use. So there's a whole lot of learning in that area about partially burning. So when I see people burning off piles of willows or weeds or something in the landscape, I thought, well, that at this point is ridiculous, because you could be producing char with that, instead of burning it off into the atmosphere, which will be good. So this is very briefly the hydrocycle. So pretty self-explanatory. The vapours coming off. We don't get the influence of the coastal weather. It stops at the Blue Mountains. So we get the weather from the southwest coming up through from the Arctic, and that hits the mountains here and hopefully drops water down to us. So I'll talk about water tables and infiltration and evaporation. That's just the percentages of water in the landscape. So as I said, the atmosphere is only 12.7 compared to 1 million in the ocean. Ice is 26,000. These are thousands of cubic metres. Cubic kilometres of water. But that talks about how much is in the permafrost, how much is in the soils and in the groundwater. So there's not a lot of water there when you compare it to the ocean. There's hardly any in that. But the rest of that is hardly anything compared to 1.3 whatever that is there, cubic kilometres, that's a lot of water. But as you can see, most of it's salt. Yeah, that's residence times. We're just recapping on the condensing effect. So the hot air obviously rises in the daytime, upslope, and then it falls down onto the floodplains at night, and that's when you get that condensation. So you tend to get more condensation down in these creek lines and river valleys, and you can see that when you drive into Bathurst in the winter. You see the fog along the creeks and the hills are sticking out. So with my hat on as director of the Australian Landscape Science Institute, we started yet another NGO because we felt we had enough skills to put some requests together. So we've been meeting with we got hyperlink on. No, I probably don't have time. No, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, have.
Oh, okay. No, it's too long. I'll just briefly talk about TALS. We set up last year, basically as an advocacy group and a lobbying group to government. So to really put the funding into what we're talking about here today, instead of pipes and dam extensions and canals, and because it's a popular reaction is I sit in council meetings or closed meetings with consultants, and they go, well, we must dig more bores, we must put a pipeline here, we must trade water from these guys and put a water sharing agreement here and a government instrument on this water. So it's all a bureaucracy thing plus an engineering thing. So there's no response to rebuilding the catchment so it actually holds water and stops the flood peaks and then trickles water down to us as we need it. And these ideas are still trickling through the agencies. So some local land services are embracing it in their own way. It's slow and cumbersome getting approvals, and other LLSs will totally say no, it's not a viable thing, and it's not, the science isn't there. So we've got a whole mixed reaction even through each local land service region. They've got a different idea. And I guess that's just driven by the staff and their knowledge and experience. So we're putting in amber claims to government. Some of our partner groups have got money, so that's given us some hope. But yeah, so that's what we're doing, is just putting in a proposal we've put together and say this is what we're taking to politicians. So guys, give us some money, basically. They go, oh, go and apply for it through the grant process. This is one of our projects, is the Vale Creek, and all those. So we just did a flyover the other day at Vale Creek. I just wanted to show the floodplain and the willows there. The willow removal was replaced by natives, which was great. There's still willows in there. So I'd like to see it as a reasonably stable hybrid system. We've got willows, blackberries, reeds and native plants. We need to move it towards native plants, but the way they're doing it I don't agree with, is total wipeout. You know, they take out all the willows up the stream and then go and put the natives in it. But of course the blackberries come in, and now up there's a good land care corridor. So where that corridor was, there's very few willows and blackberries because the native plants outcompete them. So I'm just saying, sure, we'll reduce the willows, but we'll do it slowly and without poison, basically. So that's the creek corridor. It would have been a braided system all along the Vale Creek. So even a small flood would have spread out, but we channelized it, and because of agriculture, you know, we modified the floodplain. So the Vale Creek guys want to fix these choke points where the creek's eroding, but they've got a single focus, fix that creek bank. And I'm trying to say, we've got to look at the whole catchment and look at how the water's coming down, how we slow the water down before we get to your problem, which is what you want fixed. But So that's a process we're working with the Vale Creek Land Care guys. So I'm hoping, we've already got a couple of properties put their hand up to be demonstration sites. So that'll happen hopefully pretty soon. We'll start the demo sites and start working on the Vale Creek. Another thing with the Vale Creek is, one of the things council's looking at is stormwater harvesting. Hello, you know, we've been talking about it for 20 years, but at least some of the other councillors have actually gone, yeah, that's a good idea. And we've got,
can you just reference, we can send a creek, but can you just reference, give a bearing of where it runs? Like,
well, we're looking at Perthville there.
yeah.
And going west of Perthville, you're going up to Newbridge, and then right across to Rockley Mount, and right, so it's a vast catchment, goes sort of over towards the Blaney Road. So it is a very big catchment, and it comes down massive floods. And it does spill out, and they can't stop that. But and it'll spill out more as we get more big. But if we do stormwater harvesting, which is an option, capturing stormwater and pumping it somewhere to store it is a good option for watering parks and gardens and factories and stuff, and irrigation. So I think the Vale Creek Valley might be pretty good, but I can't say specific things because you start to panic people. You know, if you go, oh, we're going to do this, suddenly it's in the paper and it's all, you know. So these are just ideas floating around. So I think in that the lower part of the Vale Creek Valley, we probably could put some structures in and store some stormwater temporarily in that area there. The other area is on Macquarie River floodplain. But as I was saying, it's getting. We had the engineers, we had the land care guys in the room, and they were still thinking in terms of making the channel deeper, building up levee banks, having engineering solutions, putting in concrete structures, and so I'm trying to say to these guys, it actually needs a switch. It needs a switch in thinking, and so I've thrown in the sigmoid curve you probably all heard of. The sigmoid curve is where you're going with an idea, and I'm here applying it to water, is we're at maturity now, and to go on the next curve, and that's what I'm saying, is we need to actually look at different ways of storing and managing water. So we need to change the curve. And that dip there is an investment time. That's when you invest in time and money in working out your next direction. So we're about to go in decline in terms of water, but there are ways of going up on the curve into a new curve and managing water in different ways. So that's why I threw the sigmoid curve in. And I think probably skill set's a good example that, well, I've just left, Jack's still there. Skill set were somewhere near that top of that curve when they saw their apprenticeships about to go off the cliff, because coal mining and all sorts of agricultural apprenticeships were just, and government wasn't subsidising apprenticeships. So Skill Set decided to open the Skill Set Senior College and put 100 high school students in there. So that's when they went bang off the curve with their new, because their other businesses not declining that fast, but their apprenticeship numbers are going down and their school enrolments are going up. So Skill Set stayed on the curve by having a completely new business arm, and that took a completely new idea. So I just said there has to be a mindset change. So here's some case studies that have worked. In Slovakia, again, these guys are part of our network. They've been to Australia. Michael Kravcik's been here. I met him in 2010 in Sydney University, got him over. So he's a limnologist, and we don't even have limnologists. We've got hydrogeologists, we've got eco-engineers, we actually don't have limnologists who actually study climate. They study water vapour and water cycles and water catchment hydraulics. So these limnologists went to the Slovakian government. They're about to build this massive dam. Again, like Warragamba and Ben Chifley, they're all talking about raise the spillway, yeah, it's the only solution. These guys went in the 90s and said, no, let's let's do the swales and the dams and the contours, and let's soak the water in and let it release slowly, then we can pump it out for the town. And they saved probably 400 million, because it probably only cost 50 million. But it was a whole of community project. See, 488 communities. They built 100,000 structures. I've built, less than 100 in my whole life. Peter Andrews probably built 1,000, but we're not near 100,000. So this is how a community came together, and then in 2011 the floods hit the Toyota River, and that was the only catchment that didn't get really damaged because they had all this buffer water, released and going. Even if you can hold the flood back for 10 hours, and that's most of what Peter Andrews structures do. They only hold water for a few days, and they leak it out through the system. So there's one of those guys. They've used a radically different way. I build leaky weirs out of concrete and rocks and wire gabions, and Peter uses big logs and rocks. But these guys use timber. Their timber lasts well. They've got these structures all the way up through the whole system, because their floods aren't the same as ours. They're just melting snow in the Northern Hemisphere. So the timber structures for them work really well. And that's how they got the community involved. They built these leaky weirs, and that's probably looking at the way beavers do it in America. We don't have beavers, but beavers do the same function in America. And my theory is that platypus and wombats do a riparian function because they build burrows at different levels in the creek. And I think when the floods come down, they go into their burrows and fill up, because they've got little airlocks and little. Steve would know more than me, but platypus and wombats really know when the floods are coming and how to deal with it. So my theory is that when you can go out in the bush, you'll see all these wombat burrows, and I just think they're rehydration mechanisms, and I think, and of course they want it rehydrated because, well, the wombats want to eat the grass, so they want the water to stay in the landscape and grow more grass. I mean, anyway, just my theory. So Dr. Madame Pant was the Director of Indian Forestry up until, I think he's dead now, but up until the early 2003. He looked at degraded forest land in India, in rural India. So he decided to have this ecological restoration project, and from 96 to 2003, you can see, again, they engaged, nearly 1,400 villages. India has so many people, so they got 1.75 million people employed. They, nearly 4,000 community groups, 23,000 leaky weirs and swales, 2,200 percolation ponds. So those guys, again, in Europe, in India, they've been doing this stuff that we're only just finding out about. And again, it doesn't get a high profile because it's not on the Facebook. It's not, this stuff's up in the back of nowhere, Slovakia and India, and we don't know what's happening. And it's only because we get a trickle of papers through. I was in the Western Chats in India and walked into a bookshop in a little town in India about the size of Oberon, which is pretty small for India. And I picked his book up in a tiny bookshop. So I'd never heard of him. I'd never read any papers he'd written. I can't find any of his stuff on the internet. I've just picked this book up, and it's all got this stuff in it. It's a report of this project. So there's stuff happening, and there's stuff happening in China that we don't know about, and stuff I saw in China which is amazing. So when Dr. Pant plants a tree, we look at biodiversity and honey eaters and butterflies and stuff. He says, okay, we've got to be practical. I want to know what I can make out of a tree and why I'm going to plant that tree. So they're very pragmatic. I mean, biodiversity benefits, but it's not a big thing in their mind. It's about products, jobs. It's about logs, it's about wooden handles, sawmill waste, toys, lumber, planks, you know. But it also recharges the groundwater and harvests rainwater. You know, that's the environmental effect. But these guys planted millions of trees, but the species didn't matter as long as they produced something for India. These days, with plantings, I just think we have to plant a few deciduous trees in our eucalypt corridors, because I've been planting eucalypt corridors 25 years. The fire danger aside and the monoculture aspect aside, I just think we need diversity in our tree corridors as we move forward, and they could be anything, elms or poplars or something that produces the topsoil mulch and has other functions such as hardwood or veneers or, you know, practical applications. So I think going forward, we're not planting all natives, but again, all my colleagues and bush regenerators are going to say, no, we're nativists, you know. We're only planting natives. Okay, well, the reality is we're in deep trouble. We need to plant whatever will grow. But some natives aren't doing too well, are they, Jack? The success rates are getting less and less, really. Yeah. Okay, case number 3. Back in 2008, when Rahamim was starting, we started a partnership with the Malone Institute, which is between Braidwood and Bungendore in Canberra, near Canberra. So all the speakers and the science really were part of Rahamim. You know, we took Sister Patricia down to, you remember that meeting with Tony Coote? And we talked about a partnership, and so they developed a very clear vision. I mean, they had the benefit of a millionaire supporting them, you know, putting money into it, paying for salaries for 5 years. So they developed all them skills and boards and advisory panels, and then they engaged all levels of government, the scientific community, the NGOs, including churches, you know, and us, and corporates. So they looked at the 4 estates, if you like, and engaged them and restored 6 kilometres of the Malone Creek. Can we play that video in the room?
Before Europeans arrived in Australia, water moved more slowly through the landscape. There were many wetlands, swampy meadows, and chains of ponds. Vegetation flourished along the waterways, which captured sediments and gradually built up the soils in the valley floors. Moisture was stored beneath the floodplain, where plants could easily reach the water table. During dry times, the water flow remained beneath the surface. In wet times, the flow spread out across the floodplain and valuable nutrients were captured and recycled by the dense vegetation. These rich, fertile floodplains were widespread. When European settlers arrived, they found the dense native grasslands and abundant water supply ideal for sheep and cattle production. The new farming practices had major impacts on the fragile Australian environment and dramatically changed how water moved through the landscape. Trees were cleared and grasslands were grazed to the ground, removing the very vegetation that had slowed the water flow and built the fertile floodplains in the first place. The water picked up speed and the landscape began to erode. Incisions cut deeply into the fertile soils, taking the nutrients and sediments with it. The newly formed erosion channels acted as drains, dropping the water table to the channel floor and drying out the wetlands. The continuous channels concentrated the water flow and made it faster. Very little vegetation remained to slow down the floods, and more nutrients were lost downstream rather than being deposited on the floodplain. Similar processes have occurred across Australia, with incised streams flowing faster and with more energy, continuing to strip away valuable soil, organic matter and nutrients as they go. At the Malone Institute, we strive to restore the original landscape function that produced the fertile valley floors discovered by the early settlers. A pilot project undertaken in 2005 by Tony Coote and his wife Tony, along with innovative landscape thinker Peter Andrews, has been a great success. Leaky weirs were installed along a 3-kilometre stretch of Maloon Creek, and vegetation planted to slow the flow and reinvigorate the floodplain. Now it's a healthy, vibrant ecosystem, which has increased the productivity on the floodplain by over 60%. The pilot project has now been expanded into the Maloon Community Landscape Rehydration Project across the entire Maloon Creek watershed. The Maloon Institute is working with 20 landholders along 50 kilometres of creek and over 23,000 hectares. The new project has been recognised by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network to help in the development of guidelines for sustainable, profitable and productive farming. The Maloon Institute aims to help other communities rehydrate 100 landscapes across Australia by inspiring them and equipping them with the skills to rehydrate their own catchments. Our vision is to see thriving, resilient landscapes, rich in soils and biodiversity, providing water and food security for all Australians.
What you can't really see there is that when all the weirs started working, all the weeds came up, and willows and blackberries, but they managed to limit the growth of the blackberries and the willows through landscape interventions, and we'll talk about that later. But the things like river bottle brushes and tea trees and all these little understories that were only coming out right up in the catchment, almost gone. The seeds washed down into the Maloon Creek system, and what you can't really see there is all this understory along the riverbanks that's choked out the blackberries and the willows and stopped them colonising. So these are pioneer plants and wattles. They're actually transitioning the weeds out, but it'll take longer than our lifetimes for that to happen. But they do coppice the willows and feed them to livestock, and then when they coppice them right down, they don't use any poison, it's all organic and biodynamic. They'll plant some fast-growing wattles around that stump. The willow will still come back, but the fast-growing wattles, or whatever plants, the casuarinas, are good colonisers, they'll shade that wattle out and they'll shrink the wattle or the blackberry down to a very small entity, and that's happening out on my place, down the Peel. So, let me put that little... So, we're nearly out of time. This is happening out west in one of the Western LLS. They're doing it on a large scale, so you can see that storm, I think it was about 15 mil out at somewhere near White Cliffs a few months ago. That basically caught half that 15 mil storm. So some of it went down the creek, but if it was a 100 mil storm, it still would only capture 10 mil, if you know what I mean. You're only taking a certain amount of water out of the landscape and soaking it in. So if you went over that now, that would be a whole greened up area, because the swales would have held that water just long enough, probably, I don't know, 3 days. So that's happening on that arid zone, that flood-prone sort of flat country right out west of the Darling, and I know nothing about it, but that's what's happening out there. But that's how there's just two different versions of how a swale works. And you can go here on the grounds out here at Rahamim to see that the water will break out down here on the slope somewhere, and that's a good place to plant trees, or in the case down here at Rahamim, we put a veggie garden there. So that's just the idea of having swales. They don't have to be swales, everyone's mad on swales, but you can actually use a yeoman's plough and put in 3 or 4 rip lines around on contour, and get a similar effect. So it depends on your soil, your topography, your ground cover. You know, it's horses for courses. You can't just say we build a massive swale here. It could be out of scale or in the wrong place. It's a lot about design. So up there we've got 1 millimetre of soil lost over a hectare is a loss of 14 tonnes. So if you've got grass, in the graphic it's saying it will go down those root canals, root channels, and it'll rehydrate your subsoil, whereas if it's bare soil, talks about erosive potential, but it's actually the compaction potential. Rain's the best way to compact soil, and it'll compact it really hard. Then it becomes hydrophobic, and the more and more water bounces off. So you've got to break it up with grass, but and this is where Peter Andrew gets into trouble. You've got to break that up with weeds because they're deep rooted and they're thistles, and they provide the first pioneering process, and that's when we go and spray them. So we're interrupting that pioneering process. It's an act of faith, but I've seen it work over so many different areas. So basically we're not thinking about what's under all these things under our feet. These are the guys that are making soil, drawing carbon down, activating soils that we don't even think about. So if we're ploughing or spraying or overgrazing, you're killing these guys, and these guys are what actually your farm depends on. This is a erosion gully at Peel. The trees were all cleared up there, they've all grown back, and bitty bushes come back. But the healing process here naturally will take another 500 years. But you need an intervention there. It's about cost benefit. I mean, if you spend $3,000 on fixing that up, to get it back in grass will take a long time. But so you've actually got to do it at a loss to fix it, and that's why governments subsidise some of this erosion work we've been doing. So that's an erosion gully that formed probably from slumping rather than, so the subsoil was really wet and it just dissolved out over the cap of the top. So it looks like it's actually flooding, and I mean, the water does get mobilised in soils, but most of it's from slumping and just falling down. The other side there, I took all the willows out of that bend. I don't know, 2000, back in the 90s maybe, late 90s anyway. Took all the willows out, and the bank eroded about 10 metres. So after I mean, willows can cause erosion, I concede that, but 9 times out of 10 they actually hold the bank together. So the bank was held together by the willows, and it was shading all the casuarinas out, which was a bad thing. It was shading the blackberries out, which was a good thing, but we killed them all, poisoned them and burnt them, which I did for a decade, and we lost a massive amount of riverbank there, went right into the floodplain. Then the blackberries came back and colonised it, and you can't see it, but the casuarinas have just started to sprout down the bottom of the toe. So if we let nature go through that process, the casuarinas will come up and eliminate the blackberries, or to some extent they'll shade them out and stop. So the concept of a noxious weed has been struck off the register, doesn't exist anymore. It's a biosecurity threat, and don't ask me what that is, but it's if that blackberry's a biosecurity threat, well, I see it as stabilising the bank and as habitat. And the last colony of Antechinus, the last colony of green frogs, are all in that blackberry bush the last time I looked, and they're nowhere else. It's the only place they can get away from predators. So I'm saying, sure, go and kill all the blackberries and whatever you like in the paddocks, but leave that one there until it goes through that healing process, and the other native plants and casuarinas are quite aggressive and dominant, so they will dominate. But you try and tell the Weeds Council that, and you've got a problem. So there's natural leaky weir formation. This is out in the national park. It just happens by itself. The leaky weirs actually happen without humans. So you see the rocks, the sticks, all the stuff that we make leaky weirs out of, are actually forming by themselves. This was probably grazed 100 years ago out at the Canangara National Park, and now it's all grown back and creating its own leaky weirs. So we're looking at natural choke points, spreading water. We're looking at legislative problems. This guy, again, is another case study, Central America. He's been here, actually that's at Rahamim, you see the curtains. He came out from America and did a whole series of workshops, and he said almost the same stuff as the guys in India and the guys in Slovakia and the guys we're saying here, so that we're joining all the dots. These guys are doing amazing stuff in the... No, we don't have time for you, mate. That's another case study we don't have time for. This is what these guys are doing in Central America. They're doing Zuni bowls and they're lowering the velocity of water, they're spreading water. The only thing that I did differently was would put mulch under the rocks and get seed to grow and grass to grow through, so the roots become the matrix that locks that gravel down, but I'm sure they'll work that out. But so yeah, we've been sort of Hawthorne and Creek, you know, Hector Park, we've copied that a lot. That's an illegal leaky weir structure built somewhere on the Windmerdale rivulet. But that's a quarter scale Gabion weir. Someone wanted to create a pumping hole for their water supply there, and but it's moved, but it hasn't failed. It's moved around and created a pond there. But again, that's a scale thing. Oh, this is a thing on the Clear Creek, where massive erosion. That's before and after, 97, 2017. Most of it was regeneration. A lot of that we planted. On the outside we planted, the rest was natural regen, just by fencing off the Clear Creek. And we built massive gabions across the river, and that's the gabion now where I'm standing. You can't see it. There's casuarinas growing in it. There's a couple of willows. Blackberries and willows are almost non-existent in there. It's just a casuarina forest. But we did plant wattles and willows and stuff around it. So you can see, just by fencing the stock out, putting the weirs in, we've stopped the erosion, repaired the whole system, and the owner came up to me in the street the other week and said, "Oh, it's amazing what you've done." And we didn't touch it, we just left it. They put the cattle back in there now, so they haven't lost any. So I'm saying we can build leaky weirs, Gabion weirs all over the landscape and use this stuff, which is crushed up and goes to landfill. But we can divert that, recycle it, and put mulch and rocks into these leaky weirs. Oh, that's the process you've got to go through to do any work on a creek. And it is a pain, and it's really hard. And you've got to have fisheries and the Office of Water, LLS, and on it goes. But it's there for a reason, to stop people doing the wrong thing. Unfortunately, it slows people down in doing the right thing. So that's where we are with the government. It's like, if it's best to do nothing, you know, in some of their minds, than do the wrong thing. So inevitably, if we go out talking about leaky weirs and fixing up streams, people will get in there with their tractors and do the wrong thing and mess it up. So that's the danger. And that's where we are as a group, is trying to get some standards, some training. And Maloon's leading the way in that. So you will do a course, you'll get a certification, you'll be able to do the work and get professionals and experts on site. So that's the Biosecurity Act. There's the Swampy Meadows, and that's it, guys. Thanks. down to nothing, and
Yeah.
so it's only half effective, really.